Hola, me llamo Jessica. Yo soy una estudiante de la Universidad de Eau Claire. Estoy estudiando para ser una trabajadora social y también quiero trabajar con hispanohablantes. Thanks for joining me. As I just said in Spanish, my name is Jessica, and I'm a student at the University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire. I'm studying to become a social worker, and I want to work with the Hispanic population. This program is for students, social workers, teachers, counselors, or anyone engaged with the Mexican American community, or for anyone who simply wants to learn about their culture. 3 professionals in the field will be sharing strategies on how to work with an interpreter, tips for encouraging good client relations, how to develop cross-cultural skills, and much more. We'll also be taking a closer look at a local Mexican American community and what agencies and practitioners are doing to be more culturally competent. Last summer, I did an internship at the Neighborhood House, which is located on the west side of St. Paul at the Paul and Sheila Wellstone Center for Community Building. I was constantly learning what it means to be culturally competent and how important this is to social workers and members of all helping professions. This program takes an ethnographic approach, which involves describing a cultural group in terms of their own environment. I'm focusing on the West Side because not a lot of people know that such a large Mexican American population lives here. I also want to show appreciation to the community that has given me so much and to tell their wonderful stories. Right now I'm standing on the Robert Street Bridge, which is a major gateway into the West Side. In front of me is downtown St. Paul, and behind me is the West Side community. The West Side actually gets its name because it's on the west bank of the Mississippi River, even though it's a little south of the city. For a social worker, it's important to know the history of the community in which he or she is working. In order to do this, we're going to use the West Side as an example. And who better to talk to than longtime resident and recently retired community liaison at the Neighborhood House, Gilbert De La O. So let's go learn about the Mexican American community on the West Side and its amazing history. Vámonos!
My family situation coming to Minnesota probably is similar to tens of thousands of Mexican Americans that came to Minnesota starting in the 20s and until this day too. In the early 1920s, the Minnesota Sugar Company, which is now called Crystal Sugar, they couldn't find Minnesotans, enough Minnesotans to work in the sugar beet industry, in the fields, before the process, but in the fields. So what they did is that they went down to the Southwest and Mexico and started recruiting folks to come up to Minnesota to work. So that's how my family started coming. My family started coming to Minnesota in the mid-30s, and all kinds of us started coming, and it was all the same kind of structure. We would leave wherever state, we were in Texas, our home base was Bridgeport, Texas. So we would leave Texas by April and come up here and work the fields, and then by October, we were back in our base camp back in Texas. That same story, you know, my uncles, my grandfathers, my friends, my parents, my friends' family, they all had that similar situation. Going back there, you can come every year, but don't live by us. Our base camp where we worked in Minnesota, we worked in New Ulm, Sleepy Eye, Gaylord, and Winthrop. That's where we worked. So when we were asked to stay, it was don't stay in those communities, you know, go somewhere else. It's that same thing that goes on today. I mean, we're good enough to work in people's communities, but we're not good enough to live in them, you know. Pretty soon they started telling us, go back to Mexico, you're taking our jobs. The jobs up here in Minnesota are only for white people. My dad used to tell me seeing signs that said no dogs or Mexicans allowed. So that same kind of atmosphere that's prevalent right now happened back then. And the thing that's interesting too is that over 300 people, like in the mid-30s, were deported from here, from the West Side, from the St. Paul airport. And just like today, they found out that after they went through this 2-week process, they found that I think there was like 225, 230 of them were citizens of the United States. They were Mexican American. But during that Depression time, they were rounding up folks. If you spoke Spanish, if you looked Mexican, that means you're here illegal, and then they shipped them back. So that same story, as you hear, it goes on today. Back in the 1920s, there was a fellow by the name of Luis Garzon who came up with the Mexican Symphony Orchestra to play over in Minneapolis. Uh, After 2 weeks, they went back to Mexico, except him. They said he got sick. Some say he drank our water. I don't know if that's true or not, but he got sick, and so he stayed in Minnesota. And what he did then, he opened up a little general store here on the west side. So consequently, when folks went to, the migrant workers that came, when they had the Sunday off, they'd come to the west side to talk to Garzon, because he had all the scuttlebutt, he had all the information. So consequently, eventually, we just started living down here on the west side. It's like, it was like the stopping place. You come here and you stop and you start planting roots. Some of the roots stay on the west side, and other ones, you go out somewhere else, but you originally start here. There was a book written called West Side Story, not the play West Side Story, but by a fellow who grew up with neighborhood. His name is Bill Hoffman, and in his book, he said that when he was growing up, he thought that maybe that the Statue of Liberty should have been put over on the west side, because if you looked at all the diversity that came over in Ellis Island, it was the same thing here on the west side. So it would have been appropriate to put Our Lady here too.